Hello, good to see you again. Welcome to Block 5, Fraction, Decimal, and Percentage Equivalence. Lesson 8. I'll share my screen. So, in your previous lesson, you learned how to understand fraction, decimal, and percentage conversion using 100 squares. So, you understood really well the meaning of percentage using 100 square, and you were able to see the relationship between fraction, for example, 25 hundredths is the same thing as 0.25, and it's the same thing as 25%. In today's lesson, you're going to learn how to convert fluently between simple fractions, decimals, and percentages. I want to appeal to you to support our global mission to educate the global population of children in mathematics. So consider clicking the like button on the video, share the video with family and friends and people, children you know will benefit, and even adults who hate mathematics. And then consider subscribing to the channel and click on the notification bell so that when new videos are produced, you'll be notified. Thank you for supporting us. Before we start, I would like you to do this retrieval practice. You can take about 4 minutes to get this done. Assuming you've paused the video and you've worked through this, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So for the first one, you were asked to complete this part-whole model. So this is called the part-whole model. So we see that we have 0.4 at the top. We have the part being 0.1. So we know 0.4 minus 0.1 will be 0.3. And we know that from our previous lessons, 0.3 is the same thing as 3/10. Here we can see that this is a half, 1/2. Now a half is 50%. So you can see others are in the percentage form. So we need to think about this as a percentage. So half is 50%. So 50% minus 22% will give us 28%. Next, you were asked, question 2, 19 out of 100 squares are shaded in a 100 square. What percentage is shaded? Remember what we learned in our previous lesson. Percentage means out of 100. So 19 out of 100 is 19%. Next, we're asked 28 out of 50 parts are shaded in a diagram. What percentage is shaded? Well, we know that percentage means out of 100, but in this case, it is out of 50. So I think we're going to have to double that one. So remember, if we write this as a percentage, this will be 28 out of 50. So, but percentage is out of 100. So we're going to have to double that one, which means we'll have to double that one. So we double the denominator and we double the numerator. Take note of these words I'm using because we'll come across it in future lessons. So this is 56 over 100, which is 56%. Okay, let's move on. Okay. Let's do some new learning. Our first example. If we have these diagrams and we're asked to express them as percentage, decimals, and fractions, how do we go about it? Well, here we see that we have 4 whole rows shaded and 3 in the next row. So that is 43 out of 100. So as a fraction, that is what it looks like. As a decimal, we know that's going to be 0.43, and as a percentage, it's 43%. So remember, the title of our lesson is to be able to convert fluently between fraction, decimal, and percentages. Next, we have this one. This we have 2 out of 10 shaded. Now, 2/10, if you remember, when we did our 100 squares lesson, 2/10 is 20 hundredths. So imagine shading, making 10 lots of this. Okay, to form 100 square, we need to make 10 lots of this. So you have 10 lots of 10, so that's 100 square. Now when we do that, you'll notice that we have 2 whole columns shaded. So if we keep stacking the same thing into 10 lots so that we form 100 squares, we're going to have 2 whole columns shaded, which makes 20. So actually 2/10 is 20 hundredths, which is the same thing as 0.2, or 2/10 is the same thing as 0.2, and that is the same thing as 20%. But what about this one? Imagine if we were going to stack this. All right, we have 10 stacks of this. All right, so notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, we have 8.5. Now, we know that 8 lots of 10, 8 parts out of 10 is 8/10, but now we have 8.5 tenths. Right, if we were to stack this up to 100 squares, or if we think about writing this as a decimal, that will be 85%. As a percentage, that will be 85%. So what do I mean? Let me write it because I've said so much. So this is 8.5 tenths. Okay. Now, if we want to make it out of 100, it means we have to stack 10 lots of this. So it's the same thing as saying, okay, let me make the denominator 10 times bigger and this 10 times bigger. So this translates into 85 hundredths. Okay, so this here represents 85%. Let's rub that off. Next, we have this one. So we have 4 parts. So here, yeah, so that is 17/20. All right, same thing as 17/20. So that's if you double 8.5, you'll get 17. And if you double 10, you get 20. But, we'll get the same thing by making it 10 times bigger, which is what we did to get to the solution quicker. Next, this one, we have 1 part shaded out of 4 parts. Okay, that's 0.85, you know that. That is a quarter. Remember when we learned about quarters and fifths, right? A quarter would split the 100 squares into 4 parts, of which each part contains 25 squares. So 25 squares shaded out of 100 means a quarter is 25 hundredths. That is the same thing as 0.25. And remember, percentage means out of 100, so this is 25%. All right, you have a go at these ones really quickly in 4 minutes. For the first one, assuming you've paused the video and you've worked through it, for the first one, you have to look at the ones that are not shaded because you have a lot that are shaded. So you're not going to start counting all these. You can simply say, well, I have 4 that is not shaded. Therefore, 4 out of 100 is 96. So 96 squares, whole squares are shaded. So this means 96 out of 100, which is 0.96. which is the same thing as 96%. For question 2, you have 3, you have 4 out of 5 shaded. Now, did you remember what we talked about or what we learned about fifths? Fifths split the 100 squares into 5 equal parts. Now, if you split the 100 squares into 5 equal parts, you have each part comprising 20 squares shaded. Now, if 1/5, remember 1/5 is 20 squares, so 4/5 will be 80, 4 lots of those 20 squares, which is 80 squares. So that's why 4/5 is 80 hundredths. As a decimal, that will be 0.8. And as a percentage, remember percentage is out of 100, that will be 80%. Question 3, we have 3 out of 20 shaded. We have 20 squares and we have 3 shaded. Now, remember that we want to express it as a percentage. So you may be wondering how we got here. Well, we can say that we want to express it as hundreds. So another way of thinking about it is to say, well, how do I make this? How do I make this 100? So you make 20 into hundreds by multiplying by 5, and you can multiply that by 5 as well, because anything you do to the denominator, you have to do the same to the numerator. This now becomes 15 hundredths. Okay? And then 15 hundredths is 0.15, and as a percentage, that is 15%. Okay. All right. Now here, counting the number of squares shaded, we have 3 here, 2 here, that's 5, plus 2, 7, plus another 2, 9. So we have 9 out of 25 shaded. We can apply the same thing we did here, right? We want to express it as hundreds. So 4 lots of these will give us 100. And we need to do the same. 4 lots of that will give us 36, because whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do the same to the numerator. So that gives us 9 times 4 is 36, 25 times 4 is 100. So that's 36 hundredths. That is equal to 0.36. And as a percentage, that is 36%. Here is another example. Here, let's call him Charlie. Charlie says 1/10 is equal to 10%, so 1/5 is equal to 5%. But is it really true? Have a think. Is he wrong or is he completely right? Let's investigate it. 1/10 means 1 shaded out of 10 squares. Now, let's imagine that this whole lot is 100%. Okay? Or let's imagine that we want to create 100 squares, which means we need to stack 10 lots of this. So we need 10 lots of this, 10 stacks of this. So it would mean that the whole row, which comprises 10 squares, would be shaded. So actually, 1/10 is 10%. So each of them is 10%. But what about 1/5? Is it right? Well, let's use the same block that we used before, but this time we'll split it into 5 equal parts. Now, remember from our lesson that fifths splits the 100 squares into 20 lots. Okay, so if we were to write this in 100 squares, this would be 20 squares, which is 20 hundredths. But here, because we've split it into 5 equal parts, and you can see how the blocks line up, this 1/5 is 20%. So he is not right. So 1/5 is 20%. It's time for you to have some practice. Pause the video and answer question 1 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. Here you will ask what fraction, decimal, and percentage of each diagram are shaded. So you count the squares, you can see it's 21, that's 21 hundredths. That's the same thing as 0.21, and that's the same thing as 21%. And you can see these are the answers. So it's the same approach. This one, I'll make a comment on this one. Here you can see it's 9.5. So 9.5 is 95 hundredths. That's 0.95, and that's 95%. Here is question 2. Pause the video and answer question 2 in 1 minute. Here we see that is 4/5. 4/5 is 0.8. Remember, a fifth is 0.2. So 4 lots of that is 0.8. 0.8, remember, is 8 tenths. 8 tenths is the same thing as 80 hundredths. 80 hundredths is 80%. If you don't understand this, you can go and watch our lessons on fourths and fifths. Fourths and quarters. Sorry, quarters and fifths. Sorry. Pause the video and answer question 3 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 3, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. Here you were asked, sort the statements into those that are correct and those that are incorrect. Okay? And here are the answers. So by applying your knowledge of fourths, fifths, knowing your percentage, knowing your decimal equivalence, and your fraction equivalence, you'll be able to sort these out. For B, you were asked, for the ones that are incorrect, change the statement to make it correct. Okay? And then you see, we can correct that. So 0.03 is 3 hundredths, and so on and so forth. Well done. Mark your work and celebrate your success. Really well done. Let's look at another example before we do some other sets of practice questions. Here you were asked to find the missing numbers. Well, what do you notice about this problem? Well, I'm sure you thought they are not of the same format, okay? They're not of the same form. So this is a fraction, that's a decimal, and they're asking us to fill that in. So it's important to think about the format that we'll use, either all as fractions, but I think at this stage we should work with decimal. So we know a quarter is 0.25 or is 25%. That is 3% or 3 hundredths. Now, if we know that's 3%, we can simply do 25 minus 3 to give us the value here. So remember, this is called the part-whole model. And we can write it as 22 hundredths, and we can even write it as a decimal if we want to. What about this one? We have the same problem. We can make this one a decimal, and then we can start to think about the numbers that could be here for this statement to be correct. So remember these symbols. Whatever is here is bigger than what's here, is greater than what's here, and whatever is here is greater than what's here. Okay, so if we do that, we now have this. So 3/4 is 0.75. How? We know that a quarter splits the 100 squares into 4 equal parts. Each part comprises 25 squares shaded. Now, if we have 3 lots of that, that will be 75 squares shaded, which is 75 hundredths. And 75 hundredths is the same thing as 0.75, which is the same thing as 75%. So we are interested in the decimal. So which means if we're thinking about things that could go, numbers that could go in here, it could be 0.71, could be 0.72, 0.73, or 0.74. It cannot be 0.7 because it has to be greater than 0.7. And it cannot be 0.75 because it has to be less than 0.75, anything here. Here are ones for you to try. Pause the video and answer these questions in 4 minutes. Okay, assuming you've had time, you've worked really hard, you've answered these questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. Here, 2/5 is the same thing as we know a fifth is 0.2. So 2/5 will be 0.4. Now, we can convert all of them into decimal. So if we have 0.4 minus 0.29, that will be 0.11. 0.11 is the same thing as 11 hundredths. Okay, and that's the same thing as 11%. Okay, so we can write it in different forms. This one we have 53%. This one is 25%. Okay, and then this one is 8%. So it's like saying 53 minus 25 minus 8 will give us whatever is left here, and that will be 0.2 or 20%. Okay, so 53 minus 25 minus 8. Okay, which is a bit like saying 53 minus 33. That will be 20. So 20% is 0.2 and it's also 20%. Okay. Next, you have this one. You ask to complete the statement with possible decimal answers. So we have 15% and 1/5. We know 1/5 is 0.2, which is 20%. So we can have all the possible values that could be here. All right. You can have 0. All the way, but it cannot be greater than 0.19. Okay. And here is the same thing. Complete the statement with possible percentage answers. This is 99%, which is 0.99, and that's 1. So that's 100%. So we can have 99.5. All right. Can have decimal percentages. Okay, it's now time for you to pause the video and practice the rest of the questions. So pause the video and answer question 4 in 2 minutes. In fact, 1 minute should be enough, but you can work at your own pace. All right. Assuming you've paused the video and you've worked through the questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. Here you ask, Rosie said, 4/5 is the same as 45%. What has Rosie done wrong? Well, Rosie is wrong because if you think about it, fifths splits our 100 squares into 5 equal parts, of which each part comprises 20 squares shaded. So 4 lots of that will be 80 squares. So 4/5 is 80 hundredths, which is 0.8 or 8 tenths, and which is also the same thing as 80%. Pause the video and answer question 5 in 4 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 5, here are the answers. Here, this is already done for us. Here, we know it's a part whole model. All right, so we need to add these two to get what's there. Now, remember, a half is 50%. So 50 plus 50% plus 25% is 75%. And that's the same thing as 0.75. Here, 7/10, right? Imagine if you want to make it, this is a percentage, and you know percentage is out of 100. So this is out of 10. So one way of thinking about it is to say, okay, I'm going to make it 10 times bigger. So that will be times 10, the denominator, and that will be times 10, which is the numerator. So that will be 70 hundredths, which is 70%. So 70% plus 30% is 100%. 100% is equal to 1. Okay. Let's go back. Not done yet. Here, 70%, 3/5. Remember, the fifths splits it into 20 lots of 20%. So 3 lots of that is 60%. So 70 minus 60% is 10%. 10% is the same thing as 10 hundredths, which is the same thing as 0.1. Okay. So that's 0.1. Pause the video and answer question 6 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. Here you're asked to complete the statements with possible decimal answers. And here are the answers. Okay, so you could have other answers, but here are the answers. Here that's 60%. So anything that should be, that's 20%, which is 0.2. So that could be 0.3. That's 0.6. Okay, so here could be 0.5. And here are the other answers. Okay, 1/10 is 0.1. Okay, so that could be 0.4. And then you want something between 0.1 and 5%. So 5% is 5 hundredths, and that will be 0.05. Okay, so this is 0.05. So that's why that should be 0.07, or you could have 0.08. Here, 3 hundredths is 0.03. Here, 30% is 0.3. So you could have 0.21 there. And then if you want something greater than 0.3, that could be 0.99. Here is question 7. Pause the video and answer question 7 in 2 minutes. So here you're asked to spot the one that is the odd one out. Okay. Well, the one that is the odd one out is this one. Why? The way to work it out is all the others are equivalent to 0.4. So that's 0.4. 2/5. Remember, the fifths splits it into 20 lots. Okay, so a fifth is 20 hundredths, which is 0.2. So 2/5 is 0.4. Same thing. Here, when you count all of them, you would see that it's the same thing as 40 hundredths, which is 0.4. So that is the odd one out because that is 4/5, which is 80%. That brings us to the end of our lesson. So, what have we learned so far? In this lesson, we have learned how to fluently convert between fraction, decimal, and percentage, again using 100 squares. It's important for you to really master the equivalence between fifths and quarters, and also to know how to use your 100 squares to know the equivalence between their fraction, decimal, and percentages. Until next time, take care and bye-bye.